The world of computing has empowered us to be able to do a great many wonderful things. It has given us a reach throughout the world. It helps us to be more efficient in the things that we do. But just like anything else, good technologies can be used for the wrong purposes. And you actually have a role in that. Not as an end user, but as a technician. You are occasionally going to run into situations where good people and smart people have done some not so good, not so smart things. Maybe accessing information that could get them into trouble or inappropriate content. And the thing that you need to keep in mind is your company can be held liable and you personally can be held liable by not reporting this. It doesn't mean you want to be the bad guy or gal in this situation, but you need to know what to do, ultimately to protect yourself and the place that you work for. Take the steps, bite the bullet, do what needs to be done.
One of the things to understand is what constitutes prohibited activities. Some prohibited activities, as I mentioned, could be legal in nature. Others could just be related to company policy. Sometimes company policy also reflects certain legal issues. So let's actually summarize what some of the activities are that you might have to run into. Understand that incidents are inevitable because people make mistakes. You will encounter mistakes, you may even make some of your own, but the importance is for the types of mistakes we're going to talk about, you as a technician need to know how to respond to them. Now there are different types of prohibited activity. Some are more important than others. Keep in mind that one of the functions of acceptable use policies, part of the security policy of a company, will actually describe what prohibited activities are. Keep in mind that some prohibited activities are inherently illegal and others are just going to be against policy. First, there's piracy and illegal downloads. I can tell you from experience, not personal experience, but people that I have dealt with, that this is actually taken very seriously. For instance, in your home environment, if someone within your household is actually, for instance, illegally downloading movies, for example, you're going to get a notice from your service provider basically to cease and desist and to get rid of whatever it was you downloaded. It's just a part of the entire legal framework. So certainly in a work environment, this is not going to be a good idea. Illegal downloads, piracy, whether it's movies or software or anything else, it's something that's not just going to be against company policy, but this is definitely going to be illegal. Different regulations are going to vary by country, by state, by province, but it's important to know what those are. Generally speaking, unless you actually work in an adultainment industry, adult content is not going to be permitted in any form or fashion. Some adult content can actually be considered criminal and illegal. Others are just going to be considered inappropriate in a work environment. And then there's theft, not just theft like we've talked about with illegal downloads, but trying to defraud, for instance, the company of information or someone else, whether it's identity theft, credit card theft, anything else is obviously going to be both illegal and then also prohibited by company standards. These are not exhaustive, but these are just representative of the types of things you may typically encounter in your life as a technician. It's important to know when you come across these situations, whether you're personally observing it, such as seeing a particular user, or you're aware of it, there's response and reporting responsibilities. So first thing you need to do is you need to report it through proper channels, whether it's your supervisor or if there's some sort of a process that you need to go through. The second action, report. Third action, report. Actually, the second, third, and action really aren't report, but understand the most important thing you can do when you encounter this is to make sure it's reported. No one wants to be thought of as a snitch or turning other people in, but it's important to know that in the grand scheme of things, it's important for you to report what happens. In reality, the second action is actually going to end up being documenting it in some form or fashion, and then making sure you follow through on the different policies. Usually, companies are going to have some sort of process or policies that need to be adhered to. So it may be a matter of you report something to a supervisor, you actually gather information, and you have to turn it in. Maybe there's a chief compliance officer or an information security officer that you would need to report to. Whatever your company or organizational policy is, make sure you adhere to it. In addition to understanding what constitutes prohibited activity and what your responsibilities are as a technician and part of the organization, one of the principles that you need to understand is something called chain of custody. Essentially, chain of custody actually has to do with preserving evidence or findings of a particular violation. Of course, this is going to begin with not just reporting, but also documentation. Chain of custody also lists a record of who has had the evidence and who's responsible at any given point as to when that person has had the evidence. For instance, if you collected it and turn it over to your supervisor, that's part of the chain of custody. If then your supervisor actually gave it to a compliance officer, that's another link in the chain of custody, basically knowing who's had the information and when it's been transferred over. Now, when it comes to preserving evidence, there may also be write blockers that are required, and that'll actually assure that no tampering has occurred. As you may know, in a court of law, if there's any evidence that evidence has been tampered with, it becomes inadmissible. So chain of custody just allows investigators to trace who handled evidence in the event that tampering occurred. But preventing tampering to begin with is actually the overarching goal. And ultimately, it's very, very critical if any legal action has to be taken, because it assures that whatever evidence is submitted is actually valid and admissible in court. So always take seriously this whole principle of chain of custody. And ultimately, remember that it's important for you to protect yourself. Realize that you as an individual, as well as a member of a company, can be held liable for these types of things that can happen if unreported. Consequently, your company can be held liable for these types of incursions. Ultimately, the bottom line is be safe, but be smart. So just to summarize, the word prohibited means actions, content, or behavior explicitly not allowed or permitted according to either the law or a company's or organization's internal policies. Illegal, on the other hand, is actions, content, or behavior explicitly not permitted according to regulations and subject to arrest, fines, could be imprisonment, or other punitive measures. Reporting. Now, specifically within the context of information technology operations, the process of informing management of a policy or legal violation by an end user. And then finally, chain of custody. Documentation of evidence, specifically who has been in possession of that evidence to ensure validity in litigation or criminal proceedings.
Now, understandably, no one likes to deal with unpleasant situations. But whenever you come across situations like these, make sure that you document, and then document the fact that you documented. I'm being a little facetious, but the principle's the same. If you have encountered a situation that requires reporting, and you've reported it, and you have kept a record of that, it helps protect you, it helps protect the organization that you're with, and it certainly saves you a lot of trouble in advance. Nobody likes to be the bad guy, but be the smart guy or girl if you ever encounter these situations.